Okay then, so first up, hi everyone. Bit of an introduction probably helps. I apologise in advance, I'm Australian, so if I'm unintelligible, I'm sorry.
No worries, mate.
Sorry?
No worries, mate.
Cheers, Ripper. So, my name's Ed, you might have heard that already. And I'm a product designer at a company called Ableton, who are here in Berlin. And what we do is we make live and we make push. And that's these two little bad boys here. And to try to see how much I should explain it, how many people here know who the fuck Ableton is? Okay, that's good. How many people know roughly what live and push do? Okay, so I'll probably skip over it. It's safe enough to say it's software for creating, producing, performing music, and hardware that marries very closely with that. And on that note, that's kind of what I'll be talking about today, which is making instruments for musicians, which is what we see ourselves as doing, rather than making software and hardware. In a shameless plug, if you find that interesting, we're also hiring, so come and say hi afterwards. So I guess, to give a bit of background, what's that like, making instruments for musicians? Well, it's great. It's also a bit nuts. It's kind of like this. People kind of do get a little bit religious about it. Sometimes they read too much into it. Paradise on the left is when you've got talented people doing amazing things with something that you played a part in. What you're seeing on the right there is someone dissecting a feature that you've shipped on our forum, and it can be hellish. But another reason why it's kind of interesting, if you think of it from the perspective of the kind of work that a lot of us do, and the best practices that people tell you that you should follow, is that, in my opinion, most instruments would have failed initial user testing. I'm sorry, I challenge someone to find like a new user for a bassoon, stick it in front of them and have anything meaningful happen with it. It's not intuitive, it's not easy to use, it's a long way from... Has anyone here ever grown up with someone who was learning a woodwind instrument? It doesn't just work, it's horrific. But despite this, you take the passion that people have for music and what you can achieve with these kinds of things. And people do devote their lives to learning the bassoon, the French horn, the electric guitar, the timpani. And also because of this passion and because of the power of iteration, these people can slowly shape a product like a piano. The innovation in the field of the piano has kind of stagnated a little bit, but there was a time where it really, musicians and instrument makers were working together to expand and refine the capabilities of an instrument. One interesting thing that I discovered is Bach was actually a sales rep for a piano manufacturer in his time. So he wasn't just a musician, he was involved in the process as well. And I'm not sure if anyone from Ableton that uses Ableton will hold up to be in the same level as Bach, but we do have our own people, like this chap here, Martin Kretschmann, who you may know as Console or Ace Pauli. He also plays with Notfist sometimes, and he's a guy that's, as far as I know, been using Ableton Live for more than 10 years, so pretty much since we released it. And we talk to guys like him, and they've helped make the product what it is, not just because we use their feedback, but because these people actually teach us how our product can be used. Because when you make these things, you don't know what people are going to do with them, especially what they're going to be doing with them 10 years later. So that's kind of the environment that we work in. You might say, well, what could go wrong there? You've got a fascinating topic, music, colliding with another fascinating topic, technology. You've got talented, passionate people, and I have an excuse for it to be hard to use. So, and the way things normally go wrong is it starts with an idea. That's how we got started anyway. And you might call it Expert design, I think, is one of the descriptions you have for it, but it's where someone scratches their own itch, right? You're like, I need something to solve a problem I have. I know how to build things, I'll just start building it. And what happens is, if it's a good idea, you keep building it and people start using it, and you start to get other people to help you out, and scratching itches work. So everyone starts scratching their own itches at the company, and eventually too many itches get scratched, and oh dear God, there's blood everywhere. And it's maybe a bit melodramatic, but that's the kind of trouble that you get with what we refer to as a mature product. And there's a couple ways to explain why these problems, how they come to be. You need to start with understanding that every feature, every thing you give to your users in your product has a cost. But not just an upfront cost, it has a cost forever. And it does that in a few ways. It sounds like people sort of know their way around Scrum. Who's familiar with the concept of technical debt? Okay, so not everyone. So technical debt is when you make some technical decisions that perhaps weren't optimal, and then you end up paying for that later. You have interest on it. It's like normal debt. I'm someone that thinks you can also have design debt in the same way. You know, you make a poor design decision, and then you're paying interest on that until you pay off the debt. But I think, in addition to design debt, you also have design rent, which is, if I choose to put a feature in my product, my users will be paying for that the whole time it's in there. It's renting its space in their mind. You know, there's a cost of having a certain concept in there, of understanding a feature. You pay the cost of explaining it to people, and to sort of extend the metaphor, which I like to do, you also have design Nebenkosten. There's an opportunity cost. You made a decision to implement a feature, and you now can't implement that feature in any other way. And so there's an opportunity cost there. And that cost can actually change over time more easily than rent can. We all know rent can change over time too here in Berlin. And so if someone comes up with a better feature, then suddenly your Nebenkosten there have gone up, because you're now missing out on a better idea because you chose an inferior idea a couple of years ago. So when you've got your features, you need to think about the Warmmiete for your features rather than just the Kaltmiete or the Provision or whatever it is you're paying. You can also think of it another way, like your feature takes up a piece of space, a conceptual space in your user's mind. You keep adding features, right? They take up different bits of space. And then you look at all those features and you go, wait a minute, I've got a great idea. Oh shit. And you found some empty space where you can really get something, but if you think of, these are like buildings. To build that new one there, you're going to have to dynamite 3 buildings. And when you realise that you only have so much land to build on, that's a mature product, and you're going to have to start dynamiting buildings. And users really don't enjoy that, and with good reason. It hurts, because they lose something that they learned how to use, and they have to find a new place to live. So I think it's also interesting, there's a book by a chap called Daniel Kahneman called Thinking Fast and Slow, which covers some research that gives a good way of explaining why changing features in a product hurts so much. And that's the simple fact that they've proven is that losses are felt more than gains. So if I make a feature that gives someone 5 points of utility, and then 3 years later I take that feature away, they're going to feel 10 points of pain. And that gets even worse when you think about the loss is felt immediately. You ship a new version of the product, and their feature is gone, but they still haven't learned how to use the new one. So their gains aren't felt immediately. So just as an example of where we saw a little bit about how this can work at Ableton, we have a feature in our product in Live called warping, and that's the little bit of magic that sort of lets you take a piece of audio, shift it around in time really easily. Some people think it's ruined music forever. We think it's kind of great. But in Live 8, which we shipped 5 years ago now, we changed fundamentally how warping works. Instead of moving the audio against the ruler, the way it used to work was you had to move the ruler around on the audio. And we looked at it, and this was before my time, but it was the right decision. They're like, wait a minute, we made a mistake there, there's a better way for it to work. And they changed it. And it can play out, a change like that can play out in different ways. If you think of this as a graph where rage on the part of your users is mapped over time, this is not a good scenario. Mainly because when the initial people have started, the rage is starting to build up. You're like, that's when a lot of your customers are arriving and they're seeing your users losing their shit on social media or on the forum about how crap something is. And you think, oh, well, maybe that's fine, it's dropping off at the end. Sometimes it's dropping off because people aren't using the product anymore because they've had jack of your change. What it looked like for warping, luckily, was like this. So it hurt, but you got pretty quickly to the story of that it gets better, and they can tell users about that. Of course, the worst case scenario is that, where you don't hear anything because no one cares. So these are kind of the scenarios we have to deal with. So what have we done? So we use Agile and we use Scrum and we try to follow design and development best practices, but I'll run through a couple of the things that we've kind of augmented or shifted to make it work well for us. So we do research. Everyone should do research because research is always useful. What you tend to find out though is that it's almost never in the way that you planned. But sometimes you miss the value of it because the way I see it at least is that research is about building intuition in your designers, and I believe that quite strongly. So user research is a hack for making your designers and developers and anyone else involved in your product process smarter. And at the same time you can also validate some product ideas for free or get some insights. So because of this, the way we do user research at Ableton is when we're doing usability studies or interviews, if it's in our usability lab in the building, we actually use something called GoToMeeting to make sure that anyone at Ableton who wants to can actually tap into the live stream of the user research and watch it from their desk without having to leave their work. So you can see in the room there with Nick Hook, aka Hook the God. There's a designer, a user researcher, and a product manager in there, and that's you can see what they're doing, you can see what he's doing, and you can also see the screen. What we also do is we have one of those guys will have Skype open, and if they've missed something or if you have a question, you can actually send it to them over chat, and they can magically remember to ask them about something, which is really handy. I can recommend it. The other thing that we do is we try to build relationships, long-term relationships, because like I said, a bassoon doesn't make much sense in the first 2 hours that you use it. It might not even make sense in the first 2 months that you use it, but eventually you're going to come to grips with the thing and you might do something amazing. And that kind of came from one of the guys that founded Ableton, sort of has become our original long-term user feedback guys, as Robert Henke, also known as Monolake. And he's been involved from the very start and continues to be involved and continues to tell us when we fuck up, which is handy. We do design, and something that we see as being very important about design is deciding. Because a lot of the time options are easy to come up with, but picking which one will actually work is difficult. And you have discussions. And that's good because what we see as being very important is to have an opinion. Just listening to people, just following consensus generally doesn't build great products. But as you become an organisation, you need to turn your opinions into principles that people agree on and they can follow. So just to run through some short examples of how that might work. Here are some user principles, some design principles we came up with for Live's UI. We've been working on it lately. And that's find things without looking, content over Chrome, and respect our heritage. That all sounds reasonable from my perspective, but Jakob Nielsen in, I think, 2001 gave a really good bit of advice for company taglines, and I follow it with design principles, and that is write the opposite, and if no one would say that, you don't have a point. Seriously, these things are to help you resolve discussions. If they're just truisms, like make it easy to use, it won't resolve shit. Everyone will agree, and you'll still have all the stuff you disagree about. So, you know, finding things with looking, Chrome over content, disrespect our heritage, no one would ever say that. Finding nothing without looking, content under Chrome doesn't even make sense. We could respect our legacy, I guess. So these are the ones that we actually work with. That's focus on proficient users. Users should only have to learn one UI, limit choices about how things work, and reduce the visible UI to the minimum necessary. So if I flip this around, focus on novice users, yeah, some people might actually do that. So we've eliminated part of the discussion there. We've made a decision in advance. Maximize choices about how things work. There is software that does that. So we've made a decision there as well. Each device should have a unique UI. One of our competitors, our friends in Kreuzberg, that's exactly what they do, and it works for them. So this is helping us make decisions. Of course, it's not perfect. Words like necessary always screw you over because you can have a 5-hour discussion about what the minimum necessary UI is. So there's always room for improvement. And we also, some of them just have to be reminders, like how it looks and feels is important. And for us, if you can imagine, a lot of people find out about our product from seeing it on stage, so it being recognizable from a distance really counts for something. It needs to have a face. And we build things. So what do we do when we're building things? We do some fairly serious prototyping sometimes, and we got into that through hardware, and we continue our long-term relationships with people when we're building. So in terms of prototyping, this is what push looked like. This is one of the prototypes. This is another one. Take care to note the skillful use of hacksawed hardware from other manufacturers and the judicious use of Lego. There's also a lot of Subaru in there. And when I asked Jesse, the guy who built this prototype, to send me the photos, and he just sent it with the caption like, this brings back memories of like smells of melted plastic and burns. So there is some blood, sweat and tears that go into this stuff. We also built this, which is like a functioning version of the hardware that we built in some software that works with Live called Max for Live. And that all kind of helped us make this, because what I learned about hardware manufacturing is the working thing really doesn't arrive until right at the end. And if you wait until, and this holds true for software and web as well, if you wait until the thing's actually working, you'll find a whole shitload of really bad decisions that you made that you can't fix unless it's at a really great cost. But to help you do that, you need to make use of relationships that you have as you build. So we have two special groups of people. We have early birds. They're the people that get the alpha or beta versions of their software, of our software. They're artists that are actively making music. For Live 9, we had an alpha beta test that went for over 2 years before we even announced the software. We actually tried to convince people to only use the beta software for making music if they were part of the program. That didn't work very well in the beginning, but that was a good sign. They didn't want to use it because it wasn't ready. But by the end, we actually, I think there are several artists that were recording EPs or albums with software that hadn't been announced to the public yet. So that's a good measure if after that long you can have people using the new version of your product just as if it was already released. So those were a few stories about what we do at Ableton, what we do different to try and make our process fit to this problem of long-term users and a mature product. Doesn't have a huge point, but just a short summary. Focus on the value that a feature can generate that you're building, not just what's easy to measure about it. A lot of people fall into the trap of they find something easy to test and that's what they improve. And with products that have depth, that can be a really fatal mistake. Understand the full cost of what you're implementing, not just the upfront costs. be prepared to accept some pain for you, but more importantly, be prepared to deal with some pain from your users. Focus on learning from research, not just validating stuff. Have opinions, otherwise you build beige. Be prepared to deal with some insanity, because sometimes it's the only way to make something that's not insane. You can bear it so your users don't have to. And one last message, try to have fun, because if you're going to do it for 10 or 20 years and you're not having fun, it sucks. So, thank you very much. Sorry, I went quite long there. Do we have time for questions, or should we just skip on?
Go ahead.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
You guys don't use 3D printing for prototyping?
The question is, do we use 3D printing for prototyping? A little bit. We were only just starting to make hardware when we made those prototypes, and we were also working with our friends at Akai, so that was actually quicker than 3D printing for what we needed to do, because it wasn't about the industrial design and how it looked, it was just about what buttons did and building a workflow. That answer to... anyone else?
I have a meta question. Are you going to share this presentation somewhere that we can look at it later?
I may be able to do that. There's some stuff I might need to take out. So, some of those shots of prototypes might make certain partners of ours angry, so, but I can just remove those. Is there somewhere where we can share that?
Yeah, of course. Twitter.
Okay, cool. Yes?
So how do you actually find your beta testers, your alpha testers, whoever's going to be testing out new versions of things?
Okay, so the question is, how do we find beta or alpha testers?
Do you have a bank or something? Or?
There's a variety of ways. So one way they come in is we have an artist relations team, because they sort of to get in touch with people and make sure they're using our products and sort of, exceptional users are looked after. We also, on the Ableton website, inside a user's account, have a form where they can say, I'm available to participate in user research remotely, or here in Berlin, or I want to become a beta tester. And that feeds into a database that our user researcher, Johannes, can then use to help us organize tests. So as a designer, I can say, Johannes, I need 6 users, they need to have been using Live for 2 years. It would help if they had experience with hardware, and then we filter some people out. Any other questions? Cool. Thanks a lot, everyone.